All right, big news, Helena. Yesterday we had a vote for 3 school levies, and they not only failed, but they failed abysmally. This is a massive deal for Montana. So for those of you who don't know, government education in Montana is kind of the sacred cow. Forever, it seemed like whatever they wanted, they got funded. I feel like that kind of changed during COVID, and now we're seeing people kind of reject what is going on in these schools, and they are doing it at the ballot box. Last time Helena School District asked for money, they asked for $250 million, and if we're being generous, we might say that there are tops 8,000 kids in this district. That is absolutely insane. And they claimed they needed that money for health and safety. And I feel like the bureaucrats just basically got hosed by some contractors who told them, oh yeah, we have to rebuild all these buildings because, buildings apparently expire. So not only did they do that bond, but then they had the audacity to come back and ask the taxpayers for more. And I had a friend who sat down and actually did charts on how much they have increased spending just for the schools. And we figured out that for a median priced home in Helena since 2009, they have raised property taxes just for schools up over $3,000, or they would have been over $3,000 if they had passed these levies, but they're sitting right around that range. That's a lot of money considering how much other property taxes have gone up, how much inflation has gone up, and how much the schools get every year anyway. The state of Montana budgets over $1 billion for these schools. Now, I am not running on public ed, or government schools, as I like to call them. I am running on homeschooling. This is my area. This is what I understand. This is what I'm good at. But anytime I talk about education, people want me to address public ed and what are my plans to fix that. So the issue with fixing government schools is they're actually running exactly as they were intended to run. The only reason you think something is wrong with them is because you thought they were for something else. So I thought I would do a little podcast about the history of education in the United States. Please don't glaze over when I say the word history. History is exciting, and if you think it's not, it's probably because you went to public school. All right, so I have a lot of people who love the academia setup tell me education is the foundation of Western civilization. I would argue that the capacity to read is what separates a freeman from a slave. It's very hard to keep a man down if he has the capacity to read. Yes, that is important. When I criticize the public education system, I am not criticizing educating the masses so that they can read. And once you can read, you can teach yourself to do a lot of things. What I'm criticizing is the model and the way it is funded. So I'm not criticizing Western civilization. I think Western civilization is a beautiful thing. It was not built on this education model. So let's talk about where this education model came from. This was not what founded this country and brought about the world's probably best constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That was not a product of a population that had been educated in the way we are currently being educated. So in the early 18th century, so after we were already country, in Europe, the Prussians instituted a education model. And the goal wasn't, we're doing this for children. What had happened was Prussia had got stomped by Napoleon. They discovered that their population didn't really care about going to fight wars. They weren't super loyal to the cause. They weren't great soldiers. So the Prussian government realized this is a massive problem. We need a more complacent citizenry who is more nationalistic, who is ready to follow orders. We need obedient soldiers. They instituted an education model called the Prussian model. And it had segregated age levels. It had standardized system. It had all these things that we think of as normal for education, but it was a new model. This hadn't really been institutionalized by a state before this point. So fast forward to the 1830s, so not that long into the Prussian model, a man named Horace Mann, his last name is Mann, he went over and visited Prussia and was just so impressed with their system. And Horace Mann came back to the United States and said, this is the way we should educate children. The whole model was set up to detach children from their families, get them into the state schools, and train them how to obey and how to conform and how to be a good citizen and an obedient worker. I'm going to share a quote from Horace Mann. He said, "Those in the sacred cause of education were entitled to look upon parents as having given hostages to our cause." So he literally called the students hostages for the cause of education. So Horace Mann came back. He said, we need to sort the children by age. We need to teach them the same subject the same way. We need to do standardized assessments. And the idea was to assembly line the children from one classroom to another classroom, etc., etc. And in 1852, Massachusetts passed its first compulsory education law. This was the first state to implement this in the 1850s. It did not go over well as they started implementing these laws in the states. And in fact, they had to get the police involved and literally rip the children from their parents' hands. Americans were not, because they hadn't grown up with this education model, they were not comfortable with it, which is hilarious because we've been so conditioned that we think this is just the way it is. Another key figure that was involved in making sure that this model was the standard model for the government schools was a very, very famous, well-known man named John D. Rockefeller. Now, for those of you who don't know your history, John D. Rockefeller was this country's first billionaire. His story is interesting. He started out as a bookkeeper and he ended up being one of the most powerful men in the world. Good for him. My issue with Rockefeller is not that he was successful, it's that he was somewhat maniacal. Rockefeller said that competition is a sin. And he created a monopoly with his oil company, I believe it was called the Standard Oil Company. And eventually they did end up breaking apart into Exxon and Chevron. And this man was exorbitantly wealthy. And he spent a lot of time making sure the United States adopted a program in their education that would steer the country towards being servants. So Rockefeller implemented bells and permission to use the bathroom and all these things that's going to make these kids come out of these classrooms, and then when they hear the whistle, they go down into the mine. That is what Rockefeller wanted. He very famously said, and I think this is a paraphrase, I do not want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. The whole idea was to stifle creativity, to stifle individuality, and to emphasize conformity. Now, I was homeschooled up through 8th grade, and then I attended public school in high school. Absolutely, conformity is the name of the game. If you are unique, school is a torturous experience. So you need to wear the clothes that the other kids are wearing. You need to pass with the same answers the other kids are giving, etc., 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 etc. This model, this is what it was intended to do, and it has been very successful for what it was intended. This was not to help children be geniuses. This was to help children go work in a factory and perhaps work really hard and get to be shift supervisor. This is what Rockefeller wanted. He didn't want somebody to come out of these schools and compete against him. He wanted somebody to come work for him. So this was not the foundation of Western civilization. This was to create 4 types of people. Soldiers. They send the recruiters right into school, and in fact, they make sure that you stay in that school till you're old enough to join. Factory workers, follow the bells and whistles. Don't question your boss, even though they could be terrible. Prisoners, if you drive by a public school, it looks like a prison. And then the 4th type is the academia class. These are people who are going to be devoted to this model and are going to perpetuate it into posterity. They're the ones who are going to be like, vote for this, and they're going to be the ones that produce the teachers to go back in and keep this machine going. I get this massive pushback from people. Well, first of all, people that love it. That would be the 4th type of person that is produced by this system. But I also get this pushback from people who are like, what are you going to do to fix it? It's not broken. It is performing exactly as it was intended to perform. And you're asking me to use the model that is working the way it was supposed to work and somehow work within the parameters of that to produce Plato and Aristotle and great thinkers and Thomas Edison's and the 4 founding fathers. It's not going to do that. You're going to have a few kids that come out of it that are geniuses, but by and large, the thing works exactly as it was supposed to work. Public education is the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto. That is why it's producing communists. It's producing people who don't think about posterity, don't think about math, but they sure think about how they're just going to be part of the stepped-on populace and somebody's not paying their fair share. It was also put in to create good factory workers, Rockefeller. So, I mean, it's doing its job. The only reason everyone is upset is they actually think that the system was set up for their children and that it somehow loves them. The system was set up because it's good for the state to have this type of population. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Our system of government, a constitutional republic, doesn't work if the population is been propagandized in this way. So that is why you've seen our system of government just doesn't seem to be working. People aren't thinking when they vote because they have been trained not to think. To this day, my husband told me, because he did public school the whole way through, to this day he says, when I hear a bell, there's something inside me that makes me want to stand up and go to the next class. That is massive social conditioning. They get them in at 6 years old. They keep you in there for 13 years. and they teach you stand up, sit down, shut up. This is one of the reasons I'm a huge proponent of the homeschool movement. The homeschool movement has rejected this entire form of education. It started in the 1990s, and granted, the original model for education in this country was closer to what the homeschool movement is than to what the Prussian model is. So homeschooling started really geared up in the 1990s. It wasn't centralized, it wasn't planned, it wasn't organized, it wasn't financed by any weird group. And what happened is people just started pulling their kids out of school and just said, come at me. They were done with it, and it's just kind of started to snowball. It's so diverse, the people that are doing it. We have the Christian fundamentalists, we have the Mennonites, we have Catholics, we have atheists, we have New Age spiritists. I mean, this movement, it crosses all parts of society, and it is just happening, and they have had to scramble to write laws to keep up with us. And the homeschool movement is here to stay. Montana has the third highest homeschool rate in the country. Only Alaska and Tennessee have higher rates than us. The data over the decades has shown that homeschoolers have higher ACT, SAT scores. If they go to college, they have higher chance of graduating college. This is the path for success. Obviously, because what it's competing against is the factory worker model. Now, I know a lot of people will say, oh, but I knew a weird homeschool kid once. Yeah, well, I know public school kids that think they're kitty cats. So I know a lot of weird public school kids, and it just keeps growing. The kids in public school, some of them are being doped just to make it through the day, because with compulsory ed, they have to go to school, but they can't exist in that environment. So they're giving them, big pharma's cramming pills down their throat. What are we doing to our children? I mean, what are we doing for the sake of what? Friday Night Lights? One thing in Montana that makes it very hard to address the government school situation is in our Montana Constitution, for some reason, they put in a plank that has education equity guaranteed for all the children of the state. The problem with that is the bureaucrats, the Democrats, the big statist people have treated that like it is a blank check to do whatever the heck they want. So it's in their mind, oh, we have an equity plank, so we have to spend billions of dollars a year and get 50% proficiency rating and still claim that we have the high road when it comes to education, and the homeschoolers do not. 50% proficiency rating. If homeschoolers were scoring that, we would be shut down tomorrow. If there were massive homeschool shootings and there were bomb threats and there were all these problems, these teachers harassing students in very inappropriate ways, homeschooling would be shut down. But because it's happening in the government institutions, it somehow gets this free pass, and we're not ever allowed to talk about it. And there are people who say, well, you have to understand, the teachers are actually doing social work because the kids in the community that they're in, their parents aren't even feeding them or potty training them or doing all these things. So they come to school and the teachers are their safe place. I think that argument would work if the school had only been there for 5 years. But since the government has been co-parenting for multiple generations, you could go back 100 years, that public school has been in that neighborhood co-parenting for that long, and the children it's producing that become adults are now so inept they can't even parent, which is a basic human function, that now the teachers have to parent. So that is not the win you think it is when you say, this is why we need schools. It's like, no, this is what the schools are producing. They are producing adults that can't function to the point where the teachers are parenting the kids. I'm getting a little hot about it, but this is so unfair to students, and it is so unfair to teachers. I have no love for the teachers' unions, but I am so saddened that some of the best teachers coming out of these colleges and going to schools are just getting burnt out because they're not actually there to teach children to thrive. They're to teach them how to be manageable. So how do you fix it? Oh boy. Now we get into some ideas. The problem is every single idea I have is just a sacred element, and I am told, oh, but that's something we can't do. And their plans for reducing costs are always something stupid like let's cut shop class or art or music. I just don't know if those classes are really what's costing us the most. And I think those are good things to teach children. So how about this? Here's one for you. Why do we have government sports? I'm serious. Why not turn those gyms into community centers? The private sports organizations can rent out back to the school to create funds for the school. Won't be enough to fund the whole shebang, but it'll be something. Then you're not paying for the sports, you're not paying for the buses for traveling for sports, you're not paying for the uniforms, and you're not paying for the insurance for the sports teams, huge, and the coaching staff. My gosh, there is no reason, even if you love government education, there is no reason why the government needs to fund basketball teams. There are a gazillion private sports enterprises that don't get funded from the government. And if the community wants them, they'll pay for them. It is insane to me that we have to keep perpetuating these schools so that people who like to party on Friday night can come and be entertained by a bunch of kids smashing themselves around on a football field. How about this? Another idea. You could let kids, instead of having to go through the full 4 years of high school, they could say, hey, I want to be a baker and I'm going to go apprentice under a baker for a couple of years. And you can count their whole apprenticeship with a baker as credits, and they could graduate, still get their high school degree from that type of program. And then not only that, 18, 20, they're ready to start their own business. They could do it with the construction companies. They could do it with a ton of things. They could go learn a trade. I know we're going to get into child labor laws, but we need to get rid of some of those too, because we're really crippling kids by not allowing them to work before 18. Get rid of teachers' unions. You know, some of the most corrupt unions in the country are state unions. So like the police unions, the teachers unions. I will never forget during COVID where the president of the teachers union was on TV with her little mask saying, we have to keep schools closed and we have to keep these kids masked and da 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 da. And then the next day hopped on a jet and flew down to the Caribbean for a vacation. They don't care about the children. They don't really care that much about the teachers. Unions care about unions and union bosses and pensions. So maybe kick the teachers unions out of this state. I am not a friend of them. If you love teachers unions, don't vote for me. I love teachers. I think good teachers should be rewarded by the market. Somebody said that FDR was against public unions. And I think that's probably one of the few things we would agree on. They are a monstrosity. And maybe if we didn't have the teachers unions, how about this? How about the parents who have children in that school hire the teachers? They have a big forum. They bring in the candidates. One by one, the parents all get a chance to interview the teachers. They decide who gets hired. And then if you hire a good teacher, you let them choose their curriculum and their lesson plan. You give them a budget and you say, this is what we want you to do. I know that takes us off the Prussian model, but a good teacher will get a feel for the class, and she or he will be able to be like, I know what we should teach these kids and how we should teach it. And the parents have hired me personally and they trust me with this. Maybe we should change who votes for these funding if we're really gonna hit it where it hurts. If you don't own property, that's gonna go up in taxes. You don't own property, you don't vote. So only the landowners are voting for property taxes. I mean, I don't like the idea that I have no skin in the game, but I sure think my neighbor should pay more. And maybe we should cap how much funding a school gets based on how it's rated. Of course, then we're getting back into standardized testing, but I mean, if you're gonna have it, maybe there's a better way to test for success and then determine, hey, this school is excelling, they should get more. The problem with that idea is that's not how the government works. With the government, it's normally, hey, this program sucks, so let's give it more money, which is what's happening with the schools. Or maybe just do one-room little school pods in every neighborhood, one-room classrooms, which was originally the model in America. Communities would get together, they'd have a teacher, the teacher taught every grade, and it was tiny in this little one-room school. I know every idea I have, I just can't touch. And that is why when I talk about the government schools, I just gear shift to homeschooling. I think it is the best model. I know that the flathead Democrats said that homeschoolers are elitist, rich people. So I'm just letting all my homeschool friends and family know we can stop pretending they're on to us. We're all exorbitantly rich. Really, the best thing we could do for education in this country would be to get rid of all the compulsory education laws. Somebody I know gave me an argument that was saying if you got rid of compulsory ed, you might have less school shootings. And I thought about that and I was like, forcing these young people into these buildings that are not serving them, forcing them to be on antidepressants so they can get through the day. How is this serving them? How is it that we don't see these kids? How is it that we don't see these teachers? How is it that me, who actually sees the kids and the teachers and knows this Prussian model is just crushing the life out of them, how is it that I am the villain? But the people who want to keep doing this, the people who want to keep doing this insanity that is just every year getting worse and worse and worse and worse, they're the compassionate ones. Well, I'm sorry, compassion is about results and not just about ideas. I could dream up a utopia, but how does it play out? You got to remember the USSR was built on utopia, and how many millions and millions were murdered. So I would care about reality that we live in. And the reality is that public education, the government schools in the United States were not built so that children would excel. If everything that happens on the regular in schools happened the first year they implemented this model in Montana. So let's say the schools opened up and then within that first year, a ton of teachers were arrested for having sex with a student. There was a school shooting. There was bomb threats. There was the kids tested at 50%. There were drug deals. There were fights in the halls. It was violent. And by the way, I went to a great school and there were drug deals and fights. So this is what your child is exposed to. I guarantee that unless they go to prison, they're not going to need these social skills to make it. If that had happened in the first year schools had opened up, parents would have pulled their kids. But the problem is it didn't happen in the first year. It's taken a long time to get to this point. And now parents are in love with the nostalgia. They've also become dependent on it because they've killed our economy and our money. So now both parents have to work. And also we see women are lied to and told the best work they can do is outside the home and send your kids to Mrs. Crosby so she can parent them. And then she can raise them to be such adults that she has to parent their kids because the children they produced can't parent. So you get my dilemma on how you fix this problem. There's nothing to fix. This is how it's supposed to be. Now, if I go up to the Capitol, I'm definitely going to push for better homeschooling provisions. But as far as revamping this model, oh yeah, if somebody came in and they said, we want to do an apprenticeship program, yeah, I'll do that. But I also am realistic, and I understand that everything I try to touch on the sacred cow of the Montana government is completely off limits. They don't want solutions. They just want your money. All right. Like, share, dislike, leave a comment. Thanks, guys.